Hello everyone, Happy New Year. I hope you had a lovely Christmas and New Year's. Welcome to the first video of 2026 where I will be going through every book I read in 2025. If you haven't seen me before, hi, I'm Meg. I'm recovering from cancer treatment and taking you on a journey to try and get my creativity back. This will be a very long one and probably a very chatty one, so grab a drink. I have got the Yorkshire Tea Caramelised Biscuit Brew. If you haven't tried this, please do. So to start with, I'm just going to run through a few things. 2025 was the year that I got back into consistently reading, and I don't think I would ever be able to do a monthly reading wrap up just because I am quite a slow reader still. With the fatigue and side effects that I still experience post-cancer treatment, I didn't expect how much of a toll that would take on my reading, and therefore sometimes it dips in and out. 1 month I might not read anything, 1 month I might read 4 books, so it would be pretty inconsistent. Starting with the statistics, that was a very difficult word to say. I use the Fable app to keep track of my reading, and I set a goal of 15 books and I actually read 23. My average rating for my reads was 3.7, so it wasn't really a year of top tier reads. And my top genre was literary fiction with 11 books, followed by thrillers with 6 books. If you're like me and had no idea what literary fiction meant, the definition is a category of novels that prioritises artistic style, character development and thematic depth over a fast-paced plot. That being my preference was a little bit of surprise because I thought I really enjoyed fast-paced books. However, it does ring true because I find a lot of the fast-paced books I read, I was either left wanting more or felt like it missed a lot out of the story. I think when I began reading, I really did enjoy fast-paced reads as it kept my attention. However, as time went on, I learned that I preferred the connection that you make between characters over a sort of fast storyline. You'll probably notice it with some of the reads that I have read, that I really like to pick the brains of the characters to discover who they are. So for the way that I'll run through the books, instead of doing month by month, I'm going to go from 5-star reads to 1-star reads. That way it might be a bit easier to navigate the video if you're looking for some book recommendations and you don't really want to waste the time with the floaters in the middle. And also if you want the juicy goss of what I didn't enjoy, you can also skip to the very end. When I've done the odd book review on TikTok, I find that I usually do them straight after I've read them. However, as time's gone on, the rating of the book definitely changes as I've had more time to sit on it, and I'll explain with some of the books the reason as to why that is. That being said, please keep in mind it's personal preferences. My choices might differ from yours. However, I would like to hear if you have read any of these books, what you think of them and if you think similarly to me. But I'm only mentioning obviously that it depends on what you like, because I have fallen victim to TikTok recommendations on Book Talk too many times, and everyone has been like, this is such a top tier 5-star read, and I've read it and I would put it at about a 2. I am going into this with absolutely no notes written down for any of these books. This is completely from memory, so those that I read back at the start of the year might not be as in-depth as some that I read more recently. And I'm also not very good at summarising books, so I probably will just read the blurb to give you a picture of what the story is. I would like to improve on that this year. The more that I read, I would like to really hone down on my reviewing skills. So with all that being said, let's get into it. This is my reading wrap up of 2025. So I will be starting with my 5-star reads. A 5-star read to me is one that I have absolutely no notes on that could improve it. Nothing. I would not change a single thing about any of these books. They are books that have stuck with me for days after reading. After reading them, I found it very hard to jump straight into another book. I've kind of had to sit with it and be like, Wow. So my first 5-star read of 2025 is The Goldfinch. This book I could probably talk about for hours, so I'm going to try and make it really short and sweet. Actually, I'll read you the blurb first so you know what the story's about. Aged 13, Theo Decker, son of a devoted mother and an absent father, miraculously survives a It'd be helpful if I could read. Miraculously survives a catastrophe that otherwise tears his life apart. Alone and rudderless in New York. Rudderless? He is taken in by the family of a wealthy friend. Theo is tormented by the longing for his mother, and down the years he clings to the thing that most reminds him of her, a small, captivating painting that ultimately draws him into the criminal underworld. This book covers everything, I feel like. I think one thing that I really like about this book is I went through a lot of motions with the main character. There was times where I felt really sorry for him. There was times that I really disliked him. And I think that makes such a well-rounded character because you're not always going to like everyone. And there's going to be different phases of life where you do change and what's happened to you impacts how you act in the world. And I think Theo as a character really represents what trauma can do to someone. I do have to say my favourite part in this book is, and I'll try to say this without too many spoilers, but basically for me it's like segments of his life following the incident of where he lost his mother, and one segment of his life is when he's in LA. And if you like the song Dracula by Tame Impala, that section of the book, that's all I could hear when I was reading it. So if you like them sort of vibes, definitely give this a read. As it got towards the end of the book and he's an adult, I was really reminded of American Psycho, and he really had that vibe about him. Then there's obviously the art aspect to it. A major storyline in this book is about a painting, and a very famous painting, and the detail of how it describes to look at a painting and how to feel something from a painting is really impactful. Even if you're not into art, I think it explains it really well of how people have such strong feelings to artworks. For me, this book was the perfect balance of a progressing storyline as well as a developing character. I really enjoy the depth that it goes into about every character almost. When I've read reviews of this book, I've seen people say that it drags a lot for them, and for me, I feel completely the opposite. I want more. This book, it's not a thin book by any means, and even that almost wasn't enough for me, and I knew that the story had to end at some point, but for me it could have just gone on and on, to be honest, because I enjoyed the writing style so much. I also think that in parts those kind of monotonous details where I could see how people found it boring were very integral to the story, because you had to understand his thought processes and how he deals with those boring moments to then see how that influences when major things in his life do happen. The relationships that he has throughout his life are very complex. I think it explores trauma bonds very well. Anyway, I could say a lot about this book. I'm going to stop. I've been talking about this book for almost 20 minutes. I probably cut a lot out of it, but... The next 5-star read is Please Look After Mother by Kyung-Suk Shin. This book followed me, to be honest, since I read it. I think I read it like summertime in 2025, and I thought about it probably every other day since reading it. Basically, an elderly mother goes missing at a train station, and each chapter of the book is the perspective from each of her children, who are adults now, or her husband, and they are almost trying to pick apart and assess every detail of their relationship with the elderly lady, who is either their mother or their wife, and they are trying to almost see how much they know about her to work out where she could have gone. But it turns out that they actually don't know her very much apart from the given roles that she was expected to perform. And I think that's just it, really. It is almost like being a mother is a performance. You are expected to cook, clean, care for the house, care for everyone, and then in the midst of that, you don't care for yourself as much, you don't take time as much for yourself. And the end chapter, where it's of the perspective of the mother, it really shows how much of her life that they just don't know or don't understand, because they've never asked, they've never shown interest. And I think for me it was so impactful because it was then, you know, it forces you to think that your mother hasn't always been a mother. She is a person as well, and she had a life before that. So it's really important to think of her as a person and not a role, basically. One quote from the book that really kind of explains what I'm getting at is, "To you, mother was always mother. It never occurred to you that she had once taken her first step or had once been 12 or 20 years old. Mother was mother. She was born as mother." This realisation led to the awareness that she too had had a childhood. From then on, you sometimes thought of mother as a child, as a girl, as a young woman, as a newlywed, as a mother who had just given birth to you. And this quote really sums up the sort of culture that these roles are expected in. It's just a very hard-hitting book, to be honest. My next 5-star read is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This book for me was the perfect balance between sort of romance and also who she is as an individual. Sometimes when I read romances, I find it really hard to just completely focus on that. But to me, it was like she also had her own independence. In the book, she becomes a writer. So I will read the blurb. For years, rumours of the Marsh Girl have haunted Barkley Cove, a quiet town on North Carolina's coast. So in late 1969, when the handsome Chase Andrews is found dead, the locals immediately suspect Kaya Clark, the so-called Marsh Girl. But Kaya is not what they say. Sensitive and intelligent, she has survived for years alone in the marsh that she calls home, finding friends in the gulls and lessons in the sand. Then the time comes when she yearns to be loved. When two young men from town become intrigued by her wild beauty, Kaya opens herself to a new life until the unthinkable happens. And for me, this relationship was so great because the one that she ends up falling in love with encourages her so much. He encourages her independence. He encourages her to remain educated, and he doesn't want to take her away from this life that she's built and change her. He wants to support it, and they both find such a fulfilling life. Yeah, I think it's a very well written relationship, and for me there were aspects of the book that were quite hard to read because I'm not aware of those environments. So when they were describing the marsh and some of the words they used, I did have to Google what they were, but that didn't change the reading experience for me. I think the way that the marshland is described is beautiful and paints a lovely picture. And my final 5-star read of 2025 was Just Kids by Patti Smith. I normally don't like to rate memoirs and, you know, kind of biographies, those sort of things. However, it was so much more than that. It was so artistically and poetically written that it felt like a work of art of its own, if you get what I mean. So I'm aware of Patti Smith through her music, and from reading this I learnt that she was also kind of an artist and had many branches, and through that and her moving to New York City, she meets her muse, Robert Mapplethorpe. So she meets Robert and they go through such a powerful relationship to have, and the way that she writes about it and kind of memorializes that relationship is just beautiful. I loved it so much. It was very emotional. Just a beautiful, beautiful book. And I also love how she just casually name drops. Obviously, the time that they were in New York, I get confused with timelines, I don't know why, but the time that they were in New York was the time that all artists were in New York, and they weren't necessarily famous yet, but it was that sort of scene where everyone was bumping into each other. They were living in the same hotels, they were, it was just a vibe. I don't think that vibe will ever be recreated, but the way that she just casually name drops like Jimi Hendrix in there makes me laugh so much. It just, I don't know, gave another perspective, because like my grandma loves Jimi Hendrix, and then hearing about him talk is crazy. I think in it he mentions the Isle of Wight concert, and I grew up hearing the story that my grandma hitchhiked to that concert at a young age with her sister, and I always grew up hearing that, not knowing who Jimi Hendrix was. Obviously now I'm aware of his songs and things like that, but to see that, like, to hear from someone that was in it is crazy. Like, yeah, it just felt very full circle for me, and I think that's why I had such a connection to it. Now we are on to the 4-star reads. I'm going to start getting a bit quicker at this. So the first one is Strange Sally Diamond. This book, I loved the pace of it. This is what, to me, set me off thinking I like fast-paced books. I did not put this down for, I think it took me 2 days to read, or 3 days, but I did not put it down. I was obsessed. It's very Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine sort of vibe. I don't know if I said that right, but it's very much that vibe, and it does tackle some really deep subjects, even though it has kind of a tinge of humour to it. So the main storyline is that Sally becomes centre of attention in her town because she put her father's dead body out with the bins. That isn't a spoiler. It literally says it on the blurb, basically. But her father had a very specific sense of humour, and he says, when I die, put my body out with the bins, as a joke, and she took it very literally and did such a thing. And then she becomes part of this media frenzy. She's always been quite recluse. She's only lived with her father. She doesn't really have friends. And the whole story is like her learning to make connections after this. Obviously, learning the difference between being exploited, like by the media, and then what a real connection to a friend is. And the storyline does change a little bit, where this neighbour moves in and it's all a bit weird. It was enjoyable, but I don't think it was necessary as such. I think the story could have just continued in a way of her learning to go through life and the ups and downs of that. I don't think the storyline of the neighbour was necessary, because then it gets a bit confusing, and then it rushes the ending for some reason. I feel as though you really get to know her and know the people that she surrounds herself with and calls friends, and then all of a sudden it gets really fast. Like, this neighbour moves in. It's this whole like sussing out who he is. You find out who he is, you find out what he wants. Again, she's exploited, and then it just like ends really weirdly, and it kind of sets it up for a sequel. Like, as I was reading the ending, I had that in mind, like, oh, it's gonna follow on because now a different story's come into it, but it doesn't. It just ends and there's no sequel. Don't know when this was written. Bloody hell, they put a lot of reviews in the front of this book. Okay, 2023, published 2024. First published 2023. So it's a very relatively new book. Like, they could do a sequel. Maybe that is in the works. I would definitely read a sequel of it if it's going to be like this. And if it follows that story. If it doesn't, and they've set it up for nothing, that would kind of be a letdown, you know what I mean? Other than the ending, this was a fab book. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the pace. Very funny. But then you almost kind of feel bad for laughing. It's kind of... The writer, I think she said in an interview that the idea is that you laugh with her and not at her. And it is very much that. Like, I think she's aware of the very blunt comments that she makes, and that's what's funny. My next 4-star read is Butter, and this would be a 5-star for me. Why is it not a 5-star actually? I can't remember. I just don't think it had that much of a lasting effect on me as my other 5-star did. Maybe that's the reason why. I'll just read the blurb. Gourmet cook Manako Kaji sits in Tokyo... So sorry if I've said that wrong. Sits in Tokyo Detention Centre convicted of serial murders of lonely businessmen, who she is said to have seduced with her delicious home cooking. She refuses to speak with any press. That is until journalist Rika Machida writes a letter asking for her recipe for beef stew, and Kaji can't resist writing back. Rika rarely cooks more than instant ramen, but as her conversations with Kaji unfold, they seem closer to a masterclass in food than journalistic research. With each meal Rika eats under Kaji's close instruction, something is awakening in her body. Maybe she and Kaji have more in common than she thought. Inspired by the real case of the Konkatsu killer, this is a vivid, unsettling exploration of misogyny, obsession, and the transgressive pleasures of food in Japan. Upon reading the blurb, I assumed that this was going to be a murder well, not a murder mystery because you know who the murderer is, but kind of the main focus was going to be on the murderer and the murders. However, it's not really. It's more focused on the murderer and the journalist's relationship, but then it's also about how the journalist, I feel like she's more aware. Maybe it's because she's a journalist, she picks up a lot of things, and it kind of reflects the Japanese culture and expectations of women, things like that. But I think it's her boyfriend who really... Is it a boyfriend or is it someone she works with? It's been a while since I've read this, so I can't remember. But either way, there's a male in the story. This isn't really integral to the storyline, but he really likes this girl group, and he wears the merch all the time and says about how he can't wait to go see them live and blah blah blah. And then I think one of them puts on weight and all of a sudden he's not a fan. And it really comments on that sort of culture. But anyway, I feel like each aspect of the story is a narrative on Japanese culture. The way that the story sets out is that Rika is a very independent woman. She has a partner, but it's kind of we're together, but we're not really interested in each other. We don't have much time to put into this relationship. She is always at work doing the best to try and, be promoted, succeed. She doesn't have time to cook for herself. She's always on the go. And the way that the book describes her is that she's very slim. As she builds a relationship with the murderer Kaji, who describes these foods in almost a really sensual way, Rika gets pulled into that. She starts making these meals. Then there's the whole narrative about weight and, comments and criticisms that people have in this culture. That, I think for me, the reason it's not a 5-star is because I found it really hard to analyse whilst I was reading. I was enjoying the story at surface level, and even though in the book she kind of questions everything, she's questioning why am I doing this? Why am I making this? What does Kaji want from me by making these meals? It doesn't really give a definitive answer to that, and obviously that's because as the reader we're meant to read between the lines and have our own thoughts and opinions on that. But for me it was really hard to do that. Other than that, I thought it was very good. Another review that I read on it, similar to Goldfinch, maybe it's just a common review of big books, is that it was boring. I did not find this boring. Again, I think it's because I like character development and trying to work out what people they are. I really enjoyed trying to pick apart the personalities and the contrast between Kaji and Rika and then her friend, her partners. I found it, really interesting to read between the lines when I could. Next is After Dark, and I loved this book. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good pace. Let's read the blurb. The midnight hour approaches in almost an empty all-night diner. Mary sips her coffee and glances up from a book at a young man, a musician, intrudes on her solitude. Both have missed the last train home. Later, Mary is interrupted again by a girl from the Alphaville Hotel. A Chinese prostitute has been hurt by a client and she needs Mary's help. Meanwhile, Mary's beautiful sister Eri sleeps in a deep, heavy sleep that is too perfect to be pure, to be normal. She has lain asleep for 2 months, But tonight, as the clock displays midnight, a hint of life flickers across the TV screen, though the television's plug has been pulled out. Strange nocturnal happenings or a trick of the night. What I really enjoyed about this book is not only the pace, but how much you learn about Mary in one night. So you've got to keep in mind that this is only one night of someone's entire life, yet you learn the type of person she is and the type of person that she is becoming. So she sets out as this very independent sister. She's very headstrong. She doesn't need any input. She just cracks on, keeps her head down. She's quiet, things like that. Whereas her sister has always been almost very needy, and maybe that's just showing the contrast in ages between sisters and how two sisters can have the same upbringing but be very different. Yeah, so in this one night, Mary experiences a lot of different things. She meets this guy, and it's quite nice how you kind of see her warm up to the idea of a relationship, because when you start reading the book, the person that she is at the start of the night compared to the end seems very different. Like, she seems to open up and warm up to people a lot more. For me, there was a lot of unresolved aspects, but then again, that comes down to, you've got to remember it's only one night of someone's entire life. Again, I don't know if this is just because I'm not well versed in reading yet, that I just really didn't get Erie's whole sleep thing. It was very surrealist, and I found that hard to follow along. I was very confused. She's like in a bedroom that's not a bedroom, and there's a man but he's not looking, and then you're almost like, the perspective of you as a reader is almost like a surveillance camera. So I enjoyed that part, but I didn't understand the reason behind it. Still very confused by it, but it was a very pleasant reading experience. So I probably will read it again and try and suss it out. I think the main reason why you don't really get many answers is because they want you to think about it. And when I was searching this book online after reading it, there's a lot of Reddit posts and other book reviewers saying their alternate endings and why they think what happened to Erie happened and what the man symbolizes. A lot of people think it's kind of like a trauma shutdown, things like that, whereas other people think very differently. So it's interesting, and it's interesting to read those perspectives, especially as someone who couldn't grasp it straight away. The next 4-star read is The Hunchback. This little book packs a punch, let me tell you. So let me read the blurb. Born with a congenital muscle disorder, Shaka Isawa has severe spine curvature and uses an electric wheelchair and ventilator. Within the limits of her care home, her life is lived online. She studies, she tweets indignantly, she posts outrageous stories on an erotica website. One day, a new male carer reveals he has read it all: the sex, the provocation, the sex, the provocation, the sex, the provocation, the dirt. Her response, an indecent proposal. This indecent proposal is wild. This, to me, was like, I could not imagine that was where this was going, that kind of thing. As shocking as it is, you really understand, the perspective of a disabled person and how they would give anything to have that one aspect of normality. Yeah, it's wild, and the feelings that I got from this were so strong. I really empathized with the main character, and it's almost like this contrast between the way she describes the smallest things people wouldn't even think of in everyday life that she can't experience, to then the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's something we might experience that we might not necessarily want to, or it might be something that affects us to the point of having trauma from it, and she desires that just to feel something that isn't her everyday life. And I think the reason the author chose such a shocking proposition is so that you really understand the aspect of feeling trapped. What I did really like about this as well is that it doesn't go too in depth about the characters, so then when they do give a little bit of detail or context, it's almost as more hard hitting because you don't really know that much about them. The reason it wasn't a 5-star for me, and this sounds a bit weird, not that I wanted to read that sort of thing, but the erotica aspect of it wasn't there at all, really. It like briefly mentions it at the start, but it felt a bit fluffy. You know what I mean? Like, if you're gonna say that she posts these shocking, outrageous things, make it... Well, I mean, to be fair, when they say the tweets that she posts, they are shocking, but the erotica isn't. And I feel like if you're gonna go from this shocking perspective, then follow it through, kind of thing. You know what I mean? But it is kind of based on the author's life. Like, the author does have these disabilities and challenges, and it's kind of hard to criticise the story knowing that, because then it does kind of feel like a biography aspect is there. You know what I mean? Very good short read, but please look up the trigger warnings. Say that with all the love in the world. It doesn't actually say any trigger warnings on it, and it would kind of spoil the storyline. So if you usually look at trigger warnings, I would look into this before you read it. But yeah, the next 4-star read is The Girls by Emma Cline. One thing I really wanted to do in 2025 was read multiple books by the same author to kind of get a vibe of what authors are liked, but I didn't get too far into that. I did read a second book of Emma Cline's, and that will follow. Spoilers. But this was the first Emma Cline book I read, and I had seen such good things about it. I think it's Florence Pugh's favourite book, or one of her favourite books. So I went into this thinking, yeah, I'll love it. Yeah, I did. But I think it's because it's based around something that I had interest in anyway. So it's based around Charles Manson and the kind of cult that he formed. And it really comes through, even though it's not explicitly about that, but it's the perspective of a girl who accidentally falls into the cult, if that makes sense. I'll read the blurb. Evie Boyd is 14 and desperate to be noticed. It's the summer of 1969 and restless, empty days stretch out ahead of her until she sees them, the girls, hair long and uncombed, jewellery catching in the sun. At their centre, Suzanne, black-haired and beautiful. If not for Suzanne, she might not have gone, but intoxicated by her and the life she promises, Evie follows the girls back to the decaying ranch where they live. Was there a warning, a sign of what was coming, or did Evie know already that there was no way back? I really enjoyed how Evie's desires were written. You can really understand what she sees in Suzanne at first, and this kind of desire that she has to almost be like them. To me, it's kind of that, but on a way higher scale. You know what I mean? Like, she sees something in Suzanne that she wants. She desires almost to be... It's like this kind of thing where she's like, I don't know whether I want to be you or be with you kind of vibe. The kind of desire that she has for Suzanne and to be noticed by these girls, to be seen by them, is what keeps her going back. And you can see how she gets in this predicament because she's not paying attention to anything. It's like she's got rose-tinted glasses on and just ends up in a situation she shouldn't be in, but she can't get out of because she wants to be seen. To be honest, I can't really remember this book because it was a very long time since I read it, and I think I was reading it whilst I was on chemo, so a bit of mushy brain. But can't really say much on it. It was a good read. I did enjoy it. I did enjoyed the descriptiveness, but I think I only enjoyed it because I knew what story it was based off. Next 4-star read is White Nights. This, to me, I shouldn't laugh because it's not a very funny story. But it's basically this guy who goes back and forth to meet this girl in the night, and let me find a summary. I'm so bad at describing books, honestly. From Google, the summary is a sentimental story about a lonely nameless dreamer in St. Petersburg who meets a young woman during the city's brief, bright nights and falls deeply in love with her over 4 nights. Only his hopes to be shattered when her long-awaited lover returns, leaving him alone with his bittersweet memories of their fleeting connection. I thought this was so sweet because I have learned my favourite thing to do is read a classic and then look at reviews in a very modern way. So when I'd read this and then looked up the reviews, I think someone said like he had the gift of the gab or something. Like, what was it? Oh, that was it. Okay, so this man invented yapping. Love bombing your situationship after knowing each other for 4 nights only for her to go back to the guy who ghosted her for a whole year is crazy. I feel like that sums it up so much. A boy who love bombs and a girl who breadcrumbs yap for 80 odd pages. They invented friend zone and yapping. Basically, it's very simple but a very sweet story, and to be honest, I don't know if this is a 4-star read or if the reviews are just a 4-star read. And I shouldn't let reviews influence how I feel about a book, but it's such a short story that it's really hard to gather much feelings about it, if you know what I mean. But yeah, the reviews are funny and it's a sweet story, you know. My last 4-star read of 2025 is Ghosts, and Dolly Alderton, I don't know what she does, but every time she makes me cry, and I feel like I don't even realise it's going to happen. This happened when I read her first book, the Everything... I can't remember what it's called, but I was like, I'm not enjoying this book. Next minute I'm crying. Same thing with this. Thought I was hating it, almost DNF'd it halfway through, to be honest, and all of a sudden I'm crying. What happened there? What I really liked about this story is that even though it's a romance, it focuses majorly on a relationship. It focuses on the relationship in a way of how this relationship impacts other relationships, if you get what I mean. And I really didn't expect to feel so strongly about the villain in the story. She is so level-headed and doesn't let herself get walked over, which I love. And not only is it about romantic relationships, but it's also about relationships with everyone else, like your ex-partner, your ex-partner's new partner, your neighbour, your parents. For me, some parts were a bit cringe. I hate saying it, but yeah, I do find her writing style a bit cringy and a bit like, ugh. But I powered through. I did actually enjoy it. It made me cry in the end. So I feel like it has to be a 4-star read. If it makes you feel that strongly, it has to be a good book on some aspect. But yeah, sometimes it is a bit hard to get past the cringe. Okay, now we are on to 3-star reads, which I have had next to me, and you probably sussed it out by now that these are my 3 stars. My first 3-star read of the year is What a Way to Go. And this was actually the first book I read of the year. This was the first book I read in 2025, and for me, at first, it was a 4-star. However, I had to think about it a bit more. So when I was reading it, I had this kind of vibe that I was like, something's off. Okay, let me read the blurb. Anthony Whiston was wealthy beyond imagination. Fragrant wife, gaggle of photogenic children, French chateau, Cotswold manor, plethora of mistresses, penchant for cutting moral corners, tick, 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 tick. Unfortunately for him, he's also dead. Suddenly poised to inherit his fortune, each member of the family falls under suspicion. That's when everything comes crashing down. So, I enjoyed this book on surface level. For me, it is a perfect sort of poolside read. It's really engaging, it's fast-paced, it's not too demanding of a storyline, so for me, that makes a good poolside read book kind of vibe, you know what I mean? So, surface level, I really enjoyed it for those reasons. However, whilst I was reading it, I was like, something just feels off here. Like, the narrative, I don't know what it is, something just feels off. When I was looking into it, of like reviews and things, one of my favourite YouTubers, Charlotte Michelle, did a review on it in one of her monthly reading roundups, and she had done research into the writer. She realised that she is a journalist for The Guardian, and sorry if the angle is different, the camera died. It turns out she is the daughter of former editor-in-chief of The Guardian, I think. I'll just leave that there. But one point that Charlotte made was that she almost seems to be always on the cusp of making a statement when it comes to sort of like these class narratives. You can definitely get that vibe when you're reading it. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible through this. The Vegetarian. This requires you to think so deeply. Like, everything isn't obvious, you know what I mean? Everything's a metaphor. And sometimes with quick books like this that are fast paced, you kind of just want to blast through it. I kind of got the main metaphor of The Vegetarian, but yeah. What? This was wild. Not in a necessarily good way. I didn't really enjoy it that much. Young Hae and her husband are ordinary people. He is an office worker, she is a dutiful wife. But their marriage is interrupted when Young Hae, seeking more of a plant-like existence, commits a shocking act of subversion. She refuses to eat meat. Thus begins a disturbing and thrilling psychological drama about taboo, desire, rebellion and fantasy. I like that she sort of breaks out of this conformity, and it's almost like she just wakes up one day and is like, why am I going along with this? Why am I going along with this perfect wife role? Why should this be my life? And her way of breaking out of that is becoming vegetarian and also committing some other strange things. But the main point that I gathered from this is that I hate men, basically. The next one, Vladimir. What? Again, what is going on? I get it. I get the desire. I'll start with the blurb. One evening, a 50-something literature professor invites her new, beautiful young colleague Vladimir to join her for a drink. Her husband is out a lot these days, having been suspended from their college amid accusations of inappropriate relationships with his former students. However, as the professor attempts to disentangle herself from her husband's behaviour, it becomes clear that her desire for a new arrival might bring the couple's tinderbox world dangerously close to exploding. I was very confused of how she has this stance of, I'm not my husband's actions, but she's still with him, kind of thing. Like, there's all these really, like, I think her way of not agreeing with her husband's actions is to stay with him. Sorry, why? Why make yourself unhappy? Why do that? But then as the story unfolds and it gets to the end and this whole dramatic thing happens, why? Just why? Why go through that whole ordeal to then be stuck with him? I guess that's the metaphor of it. But what is the point? What is the point of going through that whole scandal in your relationship if you're just going to end up with him anyway? She's clearly deeply unhappy. She sees an opportunity for change. She goes for it, but yet sticks by her husband. So then is it this kind of thing of like, you've done it, like tit for tat sort of vibe, you've done it, I'm going to do it? But then why? Yeah, I feel sorry for Vladimir. He's just used, bless him. And yeah, strange book. But I did quite enjoy it, but strange. Next, The Guest by Emma Cline. I did not enjoy this book, and I think it's because I was bored. I get that's the point. Like, the point of this book is that it's about a summer break. You're kind of meant to do nothing, kind of thing. I'll read the blurb. Alex is a young woman teetering on the edge. Behind on rent and with nothing to keep her in New York, she agrees to spend August by the beach, in the lavish house of the older man she's seeing. After one misstep at a dinner party, she's dismissed with a ride to the station and a ticket back to the city. But Alex decides to stay on the island, charming her way into the lives of the dazzling wealthy set who lived there and leaving a trail of destruction behind her. Just how long can she keep going before she's found out? Even though it's boring, I think she thinks she's wild. but it's like something deeper is going on. Like clearly there are some troubles that have caused her to have these outbursts and these reactions to things. But I just didn't find it shocking enough. I was just bored with it. I was kind of like, yeah, more could be done in a way. And in the end, I just kind of wasn't that keen on the character, but not in the sense of like I was made to feel that way. I just didn't really understand her. I don't know about this one. Next is the Mars Room. It was okay. It was very Orange is the New Black storyline. Like, it was all very much that, which is a disappointment to learn that the author did a lot of time in women's prisons trying to understand their lives under the prison system, yet it just felt like I was reading Orange is the New Black. I shall read the blurb. Romy Hall is starting 2 consecutive life sentences at Stanville Women's Correctional Facility. Her crime, the killing of her stalker. Inside awaits a world where a woman must hustle and fight for the bare essentials. Outside, the San Francisco of her youth. The Mars Room strip club where she was once a dancer, her 7-year-old Jackson. As Romy forms friendships over liquor brewed in socks and stories shared through sewage pipes, her future seems to unfurl in a long, unwavering line, until the news beyond prison bars forces Romy to try and outrun her destiny. I did like Romy's storyline in that she needs to get out of prison for her son, and I think that tackles some really important topics and subjects of how women are treated in prisons, the prison system in general, and the justice system, how women will try and fight that. Like it said, she killed her stalker. There's some kind of moral aspects to that. However, I just didn't feel strongly enough for the character. There's also other characters' stories in there, but I just didn't get how they're tied together. It was almost like because they're all in the same building, you learn their stories, but they just don't connect. And I get that you're not going to connect, like everyone's storyline isn't going to connect. You don't connect to everyone that's in the outside world. However, something's got to pull them all together, you know what I mean, to make it interesting, and it just doesn't. And it's just like, well, what was the point of learning that storyline? I do like, however, the Easter egg of the drunk tank pink, which they've used on the cover, and I think it is briefly mentioned in the book, but the colour drunk tank pink, or is it drunk elephant pink? Either way, is a colour that they used, I can't remember in what decade, but they painted prisons and doctors' offices with this certain pink in the beliefs that it calms you down. However, they found that in prisons it had the opposite effect, and then crime went up even more. So yeah, I like that little Easter egg. I didn't really do a good explanation of that, but look into it, it's very interesting. Just meh kind of vibes. Next is the Thursday Murder Club. All I have to say about this is yawn. I get that it's about a retirement home, I get that it's about old people, but the way it was written to say it was kind of like a crime and a thriller, I was just bored. Bored beyond belief. I shall read the blurb. In a peaceful retirement village, 4 unlikely friends meet up once a week to investigate unsolved murders. But when a brutal killing takes place on their very doorstep, the Thursday Murder Club finds himself in the middle of a live case. Elizabeth, Joyce, Ibrahim and Ron might be pushing 80, but they have a few tricks up their sleeves. Can our unorthodox but brilliant gang catch the killer before it's too late? It was just very lackluster. Like, the storyline was interesting. I just wish it was written with a bit more, like, oomph behind it, you know what I mean? Like, it was so nearly there, but it wasn't. I will read the other ones for the sake of wanting to continue a series. I've never read a series apart from, like, Twilight and Harry Potter when I was younger, so I am going to give them a read. My grandma did enjoy them, but I don't know. If you're going to do a thriller or like something to do with crime, I feel like it just needs a bit of something. But I feel like the way that it was written just ruined that for me. It was very like, and then this happened, speak soon. I just gave myself the ick. I can't. That's all I have to say on that. And the last 3-star read of 2025 is a girl is a half-formed thing. This felt harrowing, but almost too harrowing. Like, just, yeah, very intense. But then the sentence structure is very hard to follow. So all these very harrowing, awful things are happening and going on, but it's almost like you just can't understand it. Like, once you get hang of the way it's written, it's almost towards the end of the book for me. Like, it took me a very long time to understand the sentence structure, and it just distracted from the story for me. Anyway, I shall read the blurb. Anita McBride's award-winning debut novel tells the story of a young woman's relationship with her brother and the long shadow cast by his childhood brain tumour. It is a shocking and intimate insight into the thoughts, feelings and chaotic sexuality of a vulnerable and isolated protagonist. To read A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing is to plunge inside the narrator's head, experiencing her world firsthand. This isn't always comfortable, but it is always a revelation. Yeah, it just wasn't a pleasant reading experience for me, and that's no criticism on the storyline of like her brother's illness and the abuse that she faces. Very, very heavy topics, but clouded by the sentence structure. And I think the sentence structure is meant to reflect how she isn't really it's meant to reflect something of her childhood and like the result of something, but yeah, it just completely distracted for me and I found it a very uncomfortable read. Here we go. Here are my 2-star reads of 2025. The first one is Three Women. I shall read the blurb. All Lena wanted was to be desired. How did she end up in a marriage with 2 children and a husband who wouldn't touch her? All Maggie wanted was to be understood. How did she end up in a relationship with her teacher and then in court a hated pariah of a small town? All Sloane wanted was to be admired. How did she end up a sexual object of men, including her husband, who liked to watch her have sex with other men and women? Three Women is a record of unmet needs, unspoken thoughts, disappointments, hopes, and unrelenting obsessions. This blurb is kind of painted as women's desire. So you go into this book thinking that it's going to be 3 perspectives of 3 women, which are, as the author says, accumulation of every woman's desires that she did research into. So you kind of expect that. However, for me, it's 3 perspectives of how women are abused and exploited. It was such a letdown. It was an uncomfortable read and not in a good way. It's basically just a story of how women are blamed for the bad things that happen to them because they desire certain things, but desire is very loosely used in this. It's more so how men exploit that desire, for example, with either their position of power or their age, and it just makes it a very unenjoyable read. That's all I have to say on that one. Next is Everything's Fine. I picked this up expecting it to be a very fluffy love story, which it was, but it was just so cringy. I nearly DNF'd it. I could not cope. So, the blurb. Jess first meets Josh at their Ivy League college. He is an entitled white guy in chinos, ready to inherit the world. She's almost always the only black woman in their class, and she's not expecting to inherit anything. After graduation, Jess and Josh end up working at the same bank. They share lunch, they share sparring matches, they share ambitions, and suddenly they're sleeping together. For me, that blurb paints it as though they are from very different backgrounds, which they are. One's a white privileged person who kind of walks through life with everything going well for him, and one's a black woman that's had to fight for everything that she's got because she isn't from a wealthy background, and them coming together. Sorry, camera died again, and we're also losing daylight, so I am gonna pick it up. With those 2 contrasting characters coming together, you would expect a lot of lessons to be learned. Each other can teach things about, obviously, like in the book, he kind of teaches her his more human side. I think she kind of paints everyone with the same cloth and just sees their kind of economic background. But I just feel like, I don't know, there was just a lot of complaining, and the arguments didn't seem to be very good arguments. They didn't seem very well written. I was expecting each of the characters to be able to teach each other things, being so different, but that just didn't happen. I feel like they just argued, to be honest. Almost DNF'd it, but I had nothing else to read whilst I was in the hospital, so I finished it. My last 2-star read of 2025 was The Housemaid's Secret. I'm so sorry. And you know what? I will continue to read her books, not gonna lie, but I enjoyed the pace. I really enjoyed the pace of these books, but the way it's written is very like, and then the phone rang, and then, like, I don't know how many times this phone bloody rang, and then the phone rang, and then it was the same person that's rang every time, and then it was there, and like the suspense just wasn't there. This one to me was a bit more interesting than the first one because you kind of know the characters already, so you don't need that extra baseline and extra writing of who the characters are and blah 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 blah. But so in that way it felt like there was more of a storyline rather than just introducing the characters, but they're just very predictable books, I think. Like it filled a gap. I'm not going to read the blurb on this because I feel like everyone knows The Housemaid by now, but I enjoyed the time skip into this one from the first one. That leads me on to my 1-star read of 2025, and as you can probably guess, if this is the second book of the series, my 1-star read of 2025 was The Housemaid. And then this happened, and then this happened, and there's so many sentences that are repeated. It was very cringy, the dialogue, very predictable in the storyline. I do like the way the room is explained, because I think in the film it's explained as a very nice room, and I was imagining it as like horrible, damp, bare floorboards, creaky bed with no duvet, that sort of thing. And in the film, I believe, I haven't seen it yet, I believe that it's painted out to be just like a nice spare room in a very expensive house. So I did like that aspect, but yeah, other than that, it wasn't descriptive enough. Not for me. Like, literally, I've just skipped to a page, then I hear a crash. I roll out of bed. And I feel like every time something happens, she goes through the same kind of mental, maybe this has nothing to do with me, maybe I should leave it out. Oh well, I'm going to go find out. Every time, and it's just like you can kind of stop that now. But if you've made it this far, thanks for joining me on my reads of 2025. This video, like doing this video, has taught me that I need to be a more present reader. I think it's okay to read at like surface level, but if I want to continue doing videos like this, I think I need to learn how to be more present in my reading, like making notes, to kind of be able to form a good summary and opinion. I think some book reviews in this are kind of lacking, and I struggle to kind of make my thoughts coherent, so maybe it would be a good idea to sit down and kind of plan what I'm going to say first. Obviously this was just like on a whim, whatever. So that's what I've learned from doing this, but I hope it was enjoyable to some extent, and I'm hoping to read a lot more next year, and I'm hoping to read a lot more books that I really want to read. Maybe I will do quarterly book updates rather than monthly, because I don't feel like I read that much. But it would be nice to do it through the year rather than a big video like this, because you kind of forget the storylines of what you read. Anyway, thanks for joining me on my first video of 2026, and hopefully see you at the next one.